All right, Amanda.
Spencer.
This is the first episode of Booked, the podcast that helps you get booked on podcasts. And I guess we'll just jump right into how we got here, I guess, what we do and why we decided to start this podcast. So I'll first go with, I was in the music industry for 15 years. And I started off booking, little metal bands in my local Grange Hall in a little farm town because I wasn't good enough to be in my cousin's band. But I wanted to be involved. And so that grew into running a few small record labels. And I ran a music conference and festival and did tour booking and stuff like that. But I was pretty much always on the other side of talent representation. And I found podcasting around like 2017 when I was just listening to like real estate education and realized that I was not listening to celebrity entrepreneurs and investors. I was actually listening to just the average everyday person that was good at what they did and was willing to give the information away. And I realized that there's probably an opportunity there to support them getting their message out. And I mean, this isn't like self-deprecating or anything, but I've never seen myself as a person who's going to change the world, but I could help people that do. And so I saw this is my opportunity to help people. And when COVID shut down the whole music industry, I kind of made that pivot to helping all these people stuck at home. Go out and, perform and get booked on stages, which was the podcast platform. But I know you have a little bit of a different background coming from traditional PR. So, tell our audience about that.
Yeah. So I love so many of the things you said. I'm always like, I want to respond to all of that. But I have been in PR for 25 years. So like a long time. And for the most part, I've worked as a consultant. So I've always had my own business to a degree, but I consulted for big corporate companies in the healthcare space primarily. And so, it's funny, like podcasts weren't even really a thing in my work.
Right.
Especially not 20 years ago. I'd like tell my 14-year-old all the time when he's like, what am I going to do when I grow up? And I was like, well, what I do today didn't even exist when I was at your age.
Yeah,
let alone like 5 years ago.
25 years is a big change.
Yeah.
Things have changed.
We won't even get into that, Spencer, but we went from like barely internet to, ChatGPT for everything. So I'm Gen Z, so I've seen the whole, I was like, we're the in-between generation. Like we know what it was like before cell phones and after. So, PR it's very similar. And so, it's interesting because about 5 years ago, I had a natural break in my consulting when one of my clients was acquired. And I had this opportunity. I was working through an agency and I was like, you know what? I'm not sure I love this anymore. I've been doing it for a long time. I'm like, I could maybe take a little break. And I was lucky enough to be able to do that and think about like, is this what I want to do before I take on another big stressful client?
Right.
I had really hit the point of burnout on the last one. And so over that 9 months that I took off, I started listening to podcasts. I mean, I had listened to like Serial and, the things that kind of like made podcasts a thing back in the day, but not from an educational perspective. And so I started listening to self-development podcasts. And then I started like meeting people that I heard on self-development podcasts because I would book a session or buy their courses or whatever. So clearly as a consumer, I saw the powerful impact, but it didn't click for me at the time that was really even PR, as weird as that sounds, like duh. So as I started to talk to these people, they're like, oh, you've worked in PR. That's so interesting. I'd love to get out there in a different way. I'm sick of marketing. I'm, sick of just the funnels and talking to my echo chamber. And I started to realize that there was an opportunity, for me to do PR for people that like, I really, like you said, like, I don't necessarily think I'm going to be the voice out there, helping people change per se. I mean, we do that all of us in our own day-to-day lives, but I don't necessarily want to be the figurehead doing that. But I can help these people that I really believe in their work and their mission get out there and do it. And so as I started doing pretty much like the traditional PR, I understood, I started to be like, oh, podcasts are such an important part of this. Like that's what drove me, to want to meet these people and work with these people. And so I started to specialize in that. And to me, I know we're going to talk more about it, but there's just no better way to actually get to know somebody and feel who they are versus I think of traditional PR where it's like editorial coverage where it's very rare you're going to get that feature that's just about you. You might get an expert quote, you might get mentioned, it's great for SEO, you're getting backlinks, all of those things, but nothing in my opinion, and again, I'll always say PR is not a sales tool per se, but nothing converts people into a warm audience better than a podcast.
Right, right. Well, and also just, I mean, even if you get a full feature, it's either a puff piece you wrote about yourself or a puff piece that someone else wrote about you, which is great for the client.
And you can learn and all of that, but they're so unusual.
Right.
And, I came from the world of like hard news. And so we always talked about between the news, we need things for between the news when we don't have a drug launch or we don't have a big campaign. And had we had podcast, although it's funny, I tried to introduce that a little bit as I kind of bridged the two worlds of PR. But I think they still didn't quite get it. They probably do now. I think after the election, things changed a lot and people realized the power of independent media more than I think they ever recognized in the past. But I think that, it's like this is between the news. When you don't have a hard something to launch or sell, and let's face it, from a mainstream news perspective, nobody's necessarily going to cover the types of, not because it's not valuable, but it's not always sensational.
Right. Education is not newsworthy all the time.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. So part of the reason we wanted to start this podcast is just to kind of explain to people what the medium is. And we both found it through similar means, which was personal development and education. Mm-hmm. And, that is what I love about this medium so much is that I always looked at it like I was never a big radio person. When I was a kid, I had a Walkman.
Howard Stern? Are you too young for that?
I know. I didn't have Sirius, but like
I wasn't on Sirius back in the day.
That's right. You're right.
I'm aging myself.
I wanted to be able to listen to what I wanted to, and I found Linkin Park when I was like 9, which is not on, was not heavier, metal music was not really on the radio all the time. So I wanted to listen to what I wanted to listen to. And so what I liked about podcast was I had the on-demand functionality of something like Spotify, which did give me that ability to listen to what I wanted to. Long form, which gave it more entertainment value and more nuance and things like that. Like Howard Stern, but also the educational side of things, which I just did not love audiobooks. I still don't, because it's rigid. It's whatever that subject is at the time, which can be helpful if you're trying to dive in on one subject. And also, the example I always use is everyone I know in the entrepreneurship world says read Think and Grow Rich. Mm-hmm. I've tried to read it. I've tried to listen to it, and it is so boring. And I just can't do it.
I think I tried to listen to that one, too.
It's rough. And, you also kind of get the principles pretty early on. But I like that I could shift to learning while I was driving and in the car because I used to commute a lot, anywhere between 30 and 60 miles every day each way. And I was like, podcasts are an opportunity for me to better use my time rather than just listening to music all the time.
And you don't know where it's going to go. I think that's the difference between books and conversation where even if you listen to the same person on 2 or 3 podcasts, the conversation could be completely different based on the questions, the other person that they're conversing with. And I think that's what's it's like you don't know what's coming.
Yeah.
And so there is that element of maybe they're going to go somewhere that I'm, I've never heard them talk about before. And so that's why I think even for people that go on podcasts, sometimes they think they just need to hit a couple big shows, but I think they have an opportunity to, of course, weave their core messages throughout, but to make each conversation unique too, because ideally people listen to you on more than one.
Well, and many shows have a few different core pillars. Mm-hmm. So, again, I found podcasts through real estate investing. I want that to stick to real estate for the most part. But there are lots of podcasts out there that might be health, wealth, and family, where you can know that you're going to hit 3 pillars that you're interested in, but it's not going to be the same thing all the time, and you'll get a variety of perspectives, and it's not just the same content week after week. And that's what is, that's the other great thing about podcasts is just the malleability. Lots of people have a variety of content pillars or perspectives or subjects they're
covering. And they can play across genres, which I think is, and that's something I think that where we come in from a strategic perspective, because people do think sometimes their one note and they have to stick with a specific type of self-development podcast. But, you can expand across business, even health and wellness in some cases, because there is, I call podcasts the ultimate Venn diagram, because they even though it may seem like, I don't know, a money podcast, they'll talk about mindset, right? So it's not always straight. And they're my favorite kinds of clients. Most of my clients, for whatever reason, I tend to attract, probably because I love this, the people that bridge sort of like the two worlds of mindset and something practical. And it makes it really fun because you can find ways to apply them to so many different types of shows. And it makes it more fun for them. And it lets them reach a broader audience who have, like they may be listening in this part of the Venn diagram, but they have an interest up here and it crosses over. So I think people are missing out if they think they just need to focus on one type of show. I mean, we could do a whole episode just on that.
Oh, absolutely. But I mean, just one of the biggest podcast interviews I booked was Matt and Shane's Secret Podcast, which is, a #1 comedy podcast.
I love
Shane. I didn't book a comedian. I booked a guy that does yoga and meditation because Matt wanted to talk to a guy about yoga and meditation, more meditation. And so that is the cool thing, is the curiosity from the host opens up doors and opportunities that wouldn't otherwise be there. Back to your
and
point
if you're
about
listening too, especially, you'll catch things like there's a big podcast in the spiritual manifestation space where I have a client, not that she doesn't fit into the spiritual space, because she does, she's the spiritual investor. However, I realize that the host is very into investing.
Right.
So that's one of her, like core values is investing and, and wealth building. And so I'm like, there you go. Perfect opportunity. So it is, if you can connect all those little dots, to me, that's what makes it fun.
Oh
too.
yeah, absolutely.
Like that, like connecting that puzzle for clients.
Yeah. And providing the unique conversation that they haven't had before.
Yep.
So let's segue into why we're doing this podcast. Coming from having a role in a music conference and festival, I have a background in education curation. By no means am I a teacher, but that was one of the things we did. Is the conference was a way to educate up and coming musicians on how they can turn their hobby into a career. And so I really, again, what can I do to contribute to the world? Education is part of that. And so, I've gone on podcasts to talk about podcasting, and it's usually telling people what they can do to do what I do. When I'm on LinkedIn, I'm usually just answering questions for people about how they can do what I do if they want. And I know for you, it's kind of similar. Like, we recognize that not everybody is looking for a podcast booking agent. They're looking for someone that can help them along the way. And this is our platform to help them with that. Right? I mean, is that also what you're thinking here?
Yeah, I agree. I also think it's to encourage people to get out there and do podcasts, not because they're not aware of them, but I do think that there's a lot of people that are newer in their businesses, but they do know what they offer. They have everything set up clearly, because the foundations are really important, because otherwise you're never going to maximize on the back end of it. But I also think people don't recognize all the time, because we're like in that data and digging through these lists like every day in and day out.
Right.
People don't realize that there are so many podcasts out there. I mean, they know that, but I think not like conceptually, but not to the degree that there actually are.
Right.
And you don't have to hit the biggest audience to have an impact. And so people are really missing out if they're not capitalizing on it, because they have a much better chance of doing PR with podcasts than they ever do, trying to get into like a digital publication or whatever. And again, plus impact, right? And so I think the other thing you need to recognize is that, like, you're going to connect with people that way. So even if it's 20 people, if it's an alignment, you're hitting 20 people that you never hit before that are hopefully going to come follow you. You get to then nurture them, and then it could turn into it. So I think a lot of people don't realize, they know it's there, but they think it's for somebody else. And so for me on LinkedIn, I'm not always the best at posting. What I try to educate people on is why podcast and why for them, so that they recognize that it is something that they can take advantage of too.
Yeah, well, you said something about how, a few years ago, not everyone was on board with podcasts, especially in the corporate world. After the election, they now see the value of it. They still see it wrong. They still don't understand. They just think, oh, we should do podcast. They are instinctively going to say, how do we get on to the biggest? And it's like, you're not
Right.
supposed to be.
Right.
That's not where you're
And
actually
it should
going
be
to see an
reputational.
ROI.
Like I think if for big companies too, like a lot of times it's not because people are going to come, like in my case, buy a drug because,
Right.
like my former life. But I think it's more about like a lot of times any industry, corporations can be viewed really unfavorably.
Sure.
And I think when you put a CEO or a high level executive in that interview, if it's for, again, like reaching the right audience, it could be investors, it could be any stakeholder, what you start to realize is like, oh, wow, like they do actually have a mission that matters. It's not, it's always about money. I'm not going to lie. I haven't worked in that industry for a long time and no more for many reasons, but not to knock it because they do good work too. But I think sometimes people don't realize that even CEOs have personal stories, especially like
Right.
smaller companies, why they either founded the company. A lot of them are physicians that discovered the molecule for rare disease. I think there's such an opportunity. It's not about selling,
Mm-hmm.
but it's about putting yourself out there. But they always want they kind of want the quick win or
Right.
the result. Like
Right.
they'd rather have a quote in the Wall Street Journal than 40 minutes of themselves explaining the company's mission. And it's hard for me to these days look at it and not see that as a completely, like skewed perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess we're going to cover a variety of topics on this show. Everything from what types of shows you should be looking for, audience versus, the niche podcast versus size, best practices, things like that. But I guess really what we wanted to do with this episode is just let people understand what they can expect.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the things you're looking forward to talking about the most on this podcast?
Oh man, there's so many things. That's why it's almost hard to narrow it down, which is I think what kind of led us to want to do this because there's so much information.
Right.
I think a lot of it is someone that also receives pitches for podcasts,
Mm-hmm.
especially this week has been quite a week for that. I want people to understand if they are going to do it themselves, what not to do.
Right.
Because I think that is just as important. We want you to feel confident getting out there, whether it's with yourself. It's what not to do if you're pitching yourself. And also I would say how to pick a good partner if you are going to work with somebody as well. Because I see pitches that come from individuals, either using AI platforms, which have become very obvious to me. And I don't mean ChatGPT.
Right.
I mean the ones that you pay for, that they automate the process for you. And then you see people pitching themselves that, it's like a resume and it's all about them and not the value that they bring to the show. So I think it's like, helping people either if they're going to do it themselves understand what a good pitch looks like and what's going to get them success also in selecting the shows. And then also if they're going to choose somebody to work with, the things that they should look for.
Right. Because we're not all the same. We have different backgrounds. We have different perspectives and different.
I would say I'm not for everybody. And I also am only so scalable. So I can't have every client in the world. Neither can you. Right. So I am friends with a lot of PR people that work in podcasts and we help each other. And I think
the time.
It's so valuable for us to have each other because we can only service so many clients at one time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess for me, what I always get excited about is explaining to people the possibilities of podcast, because the default thought is either I get in front of a large audience and I get an ROI, or I start a podcast, I get a big audience, I sell ads, and we can talk from both sides because my company also does podcast production for people. But what people often forget is just like the things that are harder to quantify or you don't know how to forecast. So,
and you can't really with podcasts because it's
that's
right?
just it.
Like,
it's not quantifiable until it's quantifiable.
Exactly. Because you don't know what's I have so many clients that have gone on podcasts and gotten invited into other communities to teach. They've gotten opportunities. They've had people want to come take their mastermind, like big podcast hosts, like which I would call like in my world, celeb podcast hosts have like begged, like, please, I need to come, I want to come take your mastermind. So, I think you don't always even know. And that's the other thing too, we could do a whole episode on people, how to take advantage of those relationships.
Yeah.
Because I find some clients are better at that.
Oh, yeah.
Than others, for sure.
Well, I was just, shout out to Westchester Studios. That's where we're recording right now. I was just talking to Gabe, the producer, here at the studio about how he had me on their internal podcast, and someone that I've known for 10 years saw the clip. He's back in music, and I don't really market to my music community, the service or anything like that. But he reached out to me and he was like, hey, I've actually been meaning to hit you up. I want to get booked on podcasts. And it was from a clip that came from going on the podcast here at the studio with Gabe. And that's that. But what that comes back to is there's no way for me to forecast that.
No, wait, that's what I mean. It's kind of can be the challenge, but it also is the fun of it, right?
Yeah.
You don't know who's going to reach out because they came across something that you were in.
Yeah. So I think that kind of does it for our first episode here of Booked, the podcast that helps you get booked on podcasts.
Yeah, I'm excited to see where we go from here.
Yeah. So I actually forgot to say, my name is Spencer Carpenter. My company is Outlier Audio, and this is
Amanda Foley.
And what's your company name?
Oh, Curate Your Soul, Intuitive Public Relations.
There we go. So we'll have links to our social media and our websites and stuff like that in the description. Please subscribe. Please leave us a review. And if you know anybody that you think is going to find value in this podcast moving forward, please send it to them, because we're going to go over best practices, tips, how we structure our pitches, how we do research.
Even how we work with clients, because I think we do that differently. And there's a lot of different ways that PR booking agents work with clients and services that they provide. Yep.
And so that goes back to what you were saying about finding the right partner. So, we can kind of advise on the trade-offs of what you get with different types of services. So, again, thanks for joining us for our first episode.